Hello to all the usual suspects out there. Good morning, Glenn. You guys can hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
All right. Just out of curiosity, which sounds better? I'm going to select a different microphone here, bring this guy in.
I would say the first one because you're muted right now.
All right, then I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I guess if you plug in the other microphone, it helps. All right. We've got 133 people signed up for today. I don't see our speaker yet. Hopefully they will arrive soon. Let me click on the link that I sent them just to validate it's the same one we are all joining. I don't think I've ever had it where it isn't. I always like to make sure.
I had to register twice today. Usually I don't have to do that, Daniel, but just FYI.
Register with Intel's site twice or Zoom or?
No, I did the Intel side, then clicked on the launch, and then it made me re-register inside the Zoom construct.
Okay, that's weird. I have no idea what that's about. Thanks for letting me know. All right, be on the lookout for Matthew Pollard. Oh, here he is, he's connecting. Great. And as people are connecting, it's that time, of course, where we open up the mics and ask everybody what sort of real estate topics they would like to talk about. We're going to continue to wait as people are joining. Hi, Matthew, good to see you. We've got 133 people registered for today. People will probably be joining for the first 5 minutes or so. It's good to meet you. You're on mute, by the way. Yeah, you're on mute, Matthew.
There we go. I think you can hear me now.
Perfect.
How are you doing?
Hey, it's bright and early where you are, isn't it?
Well, not quite. Not quite. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, so it's the end of the afternoon.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought you were coming to us from Australia.
No,
we did have somebody.
You can probably tell from my accent. I lived in Australia for a long time, but not anymore.
Okay. Yeah, we did have some unfortunate soul, a speaker, come in a couple of weeks ago from Australia. I think they said it was 5 a.m. their time.
Oh goodness, yeah. No, I'm much
on a Saturday, of course.
much luckier than them, it seems.
All right. We're going to continue to let people join here. Welcome. This is the REI Club at Intel. A quick update on I had a lot of people contact me yesterday for Sean Denise contact information and when her video would be available. And I just wanted to say that we're currently working through getting our previous speakers page back up. I'm a little frustrated with the experience. We actually had almost all the data back, and then we did the same thing and we rewrote all the data again. So it's too easy to hit that edit all button, it appears. So we're gonna redo it again, and maybe we're gonna talk about doing it in a way that's going to allow people who are alumni, such as people who have retired from Intel, who have moved on to other companies. Currently, they don't have access to the resources that this group provides. And we do provide links to all our speakers, the contact information, usually a slide deck if they permit it, and of course the recording. So we're going to be looking at putting those things up probably in Facebook as well, and making it available there for people who don't have Intel internal access. It'll be a private group, of course, but let me know if you have any questions or concerns about that. I would definitely want to hear from everybody here before we make a move like that. The next thing to mention is that I'm sure everybody has heard, but the core CPI numbers came out yesterday, and we are at 8.2% core CPI. which means that the Fed is continuing to aggressively raise rates. And many of the predictions that we were talking about, even a year and a half ago, right after the CARES Act, are coming true. The stagflation that we've been talking about on and off for the last year and a half is starting to hit us and hit us hard. And unfortunately, I think the Fed is going to continue to raise rates. Probably we're in for another probably two more rate hikes, maybe three, but they have to get this inflation under control. So it is a great time to be learning new skills and keeping your cash on the sidelines. For those of you who have been investing over the past 3 years that we've been running this club, you're hopefully in a really good position. And if not, it's never too late to find people who have done this before you and are continuing to either help people or resources like this in the club. So it's never too late to achieve your financial goals. And remember that real estate has created more wealth than any other asset in history. So with that, and with the idea of learning skills, I'm going to introduce to you Matthew Pollard. And this is a little bit different of a talk than we normally do. This is going to be a fireside chat. And I apologize in advance. You can probably tell I am still sick. It's been a week and a half and I'm still sick. I'm getting over it, but my voice is still not great. Kind of nasally, but we're going to deal with it. I'd like to introduce Matthew here. Let me pull up his bio, which I conveniently just closed and put down somewhere. Where did it go? Here we go. Matthew Pollard, he's responsible for creating 5 multi-million-dollar businesses, and he has been able to coach people with right motivations and right attitudes for multiple years now. He did this all before he was the age of 30, and today he's written a best-selling book, which I thought would be really applicable because most of us are engineers or technical majors. Of course, there's all varieties of people here, marketing, HR, supply chain, different people that are here. But many of us at tech companies are introverts. And Matt has written a book called the Introverts. Oh gosh, I'm apologizing. I put the tab down. Matt, can you introduce your book?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually 2 books. So it's the Introverts Edge book series. One's on networking and one's on sales. Though I have a podcast called the Introverts Edge where we cover a whole gambit of topics, including leadership and pretty much anything you can imagine as a extroverted arena. All
right. And of course, being an extrovert. Now, I assume that much of this book would go into the idea of not only sales, but negotiations. And of course, in real estate, that's a key point. Before we get into that, could you just give your background? What were you doing before you were a coach and an author?
Well, so, I mean, a lot of people, and I think this is a really important topic to talk about because a lot of people will see someone presenting and talking about sales, talking about networking, talking about negotiation, speaking from stage, and they naturally see if that person articulates well that they're obviously naturally extroverted. They've got that gift of gab. They just naturally had that ability. It wasn't the case for me. I mean, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. I was super introverted. Luckily enough, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome, which basically means I put on a funny pair of colored lenses and miraculously I can learn to read, but not like everybody else. I could start the process. So there I was, I hustled for the last 2 years of high school, got in the top 20% of my state, and I was exhausted. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And my family we all agreed that I was just going to spend a year finding myself. So I took a year to work at a real estate agency, and it would have been nice if I could spend the year there. But 3 weeks in, just before Christmas in Australia, which is our summer and Christmas break at the same time, they told me the office was closing down and I was out of job. So there I am, 3 weeks in, I'm out of work, no prospects. And in Australia, everyone takes a month off at around Christmas time. So I had to go and find whatever I could get. And commission-only sales was the only thing that was available to me at that time. There were 3 jobs in the paper. They were all commission-only sales. And so I applied for all 3. And I was actually excited to hear, while terrified because I had a lot of self-image issues. I had bad acne, I had braces back then, that all 3 of them had agreed to interview me. And then all 3 of them offered me a job. And I'm like, maybe they see something in me I don't see in myself. Well, I took a job doing business to business telecommunications sales, and my manager quickly put that excitement to rest by saying, Matt, we hire everyone. Like we got this saying, we throw mud up against the wall and we see what sticks, which is a fun saying until you realize you're the mud. Well, after 5 days product training and not a single second of sales training, I get thrown on this road. It's called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. There's like 1,000 doors on each side. And I just get told to go sell. And so I did. I walked in. I had this realization. I had no idea what to say. And luckily enough, in my first door, I was politely told to leave. Then I was less politely told to leave. Then I was sworn at. But my personal favorite was always getting told to get a real job, because that was the only job I could get. So door after door, this kept happening until I got to my 93rd door, where I made my first sale. And, a lot of people, will ask me, well, how was I so resilient to just keep going door to door? And we can get to that. But, on my 93rd door, I remember making my first sale. And then I was confronted with a stark reality. Like I'd made $70. I was ecstatic for about 45 seconds, but then I realized I've got to do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And I think a lot of times when we're confronted, especially with what we perceive as a natural ability, we'll either say, let's grind it out and work harder, or let's just give up. And, even things that are daunting, like real estate. We go, oh, there's too many things we don't understand. So that's it. It's just out of our control, or let's just get started. For me, I'm fine with grinding things out and hustling, but not without a plan. So I said, well, what's my plan going to be? And I went, well, you know what? For sales can't be a natural ability for it to work for me. It has to be a step-by-step system. So I went, well, where can I learn this system? Certainly not books, because my reading speed was terrible. So I typed in sales system in YouTube and all these videos came up, and it was literally that easy. I would spend 8 hours a day applying what I learned, and then I'd go home and spend 8 hours learning the next step or perfecting the one I was working on. And on weekends, I'd spend 16 hours practicing. Now, I know for a lot of people, this probably sounds horrific. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I would have loved to do it over 6 months. But 6 weeks, that's what I did every single day. But soon it would get much quicker to make a sale. It would be, 65 doors, then 38 doors, then 27 doors, then 18, then 9. Eventually, I got it down to making a sale every 3 doors. And about 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside, and he had this puzzled look in his face. I thought I was in trouble. And I was the quiet guy that used to hand in his paperwork downstairs. I never really talked to the boisterous salespeople upstairs that, never really listened to each other. They'd all be bragging about the deal they closed and how they locked in that, that conversation and that deal. And he said to me, Matt, we're kind of puzzled by this, but we just got our national sales figures, and you're the number one salesperson in the company. This was the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. They had thousands of door-to-door salespeople, and I was the number one, and it took 6 weeks to go from having no business in sales to being the number one. So they said to me, you're management material. Let's promote you. I don't know why people think because you can sell, you can manage. I had no idea. And they said, no worries, mud up against the wall. We'll see what sticks. Well, it wasn't long before I was given a team of 20 and nobody stuck. They all quit within 24 hours. But back to YouTube to learn how to manage. I hope we're starting to get the understanding that everything is a natural skill, a step-by-step methodology that you can learn. Well, very quickly, I became very good at it. And I got promoted 7 times in the space of 12 months. And I ended up coming back to the head office state, being promoted as the state manager. And then I decided to start my own business. Well, long story short, fast forward just shy of a decade, I'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. And now, the Introvert's Edge book series, which I wrote when I moved to the United States, has sold almost 100,000 copies now, and it's in 16 languages, which I'm ecstatic to say.
So you've talked a lot about salespeople that are here, but many of the people that are on this call are not necessarily salespeople. How are those skills translated into what people do in other types of jobs and professions?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of elements here. So firstly, while my origin was in sales, I had to learn leadership, I had to learn networking, I had to learn how to handle conversations like this. The fact is that this applies far more than just to introverts, by the way. I've spoken at so many organizations about the interplay between introverts and extroverts. And, so extroverts don't understand their introverted counterparts. And a lot of times with planning, I find that introverts with planning run circles around their extroverted counterparts, yet in the moment, an extrovert has a natural advantage. So we have to look at how we can leverage those strengths because, I mean, especially, I've spoken at Intel and I know that, you're considered, a newbie if you've been there for less than 20 years, right? So, it tends to gravitate and if your culture is stuck because you've been around these groups of people for such a long period of time. So you have to learn that as an introvert, firstly, you're not a second-class citizen. Your path to success is just different to that of an extrovert. And then you need to realize that my big mission in life is to confront this stigma around introversion and help you realize that this gift of gab thing is a total lie. It's the biggest bit of fake news we've ever been told, yet we buy into it. Our HR managers say, oh, poor Daniel, he's an introvert, we'll put him in a nice quiet role. Oh, but Sarah, she's really big extrovert, we'll put her in a sales role, or we'll put her into leadership. None of that is the right way to go. When I look at organizations and how they'll do an assessment, a personality type assessment, and then, put them into specific roles, that's madness. I mean, Zig Ziglar was an introvert. He's the most, well-known sales trainer in the world. But then you go across Oprah Winfrey, who as a talk show host, she was an introvert. David Letterman's an introvert. So we have to understand that we have introverts in our organization, we have extroverts in our organization, and those two groups a lot of times don't understand each other. They don't know how to interact. Now, if you're an introverted leader, a lot of times you will need to learn strategies on how to manage your team correctly. If you're an introverted staff member, well, you need to learn how to be involved in meetings in a planned and prepared way. If you're an extroverted leader, by the way, you have to learn how to give your team members advance notice that are introverted about what's going to happen in the meeting so they can plan and prepare. Otherwise, you'll live your life wondering why they always bring up a much better idea than what they did in the meeting, even though you specifically asked them in the meeting 3 days later, because you didn't give them the chance to reflect. And now you'll know forever you've got a lesser idea of how to, that will never deliver the best results. So as leaders, we have to learn how to leverage our best talent. As staff members, we have to learn how to make the best of the opportunities that are happening, including meetings where we feel like we're disadvantaged, but we've got to stop being at effect by that. And just to bring it back to one very clear point, when I spoke at Intel, I remember, I spoke and I stayed at the A-Loft. So, if anyone has, gone over to the A-Loft there, you'll know that the A-Loft, where they put up a lot of their executives for conferences when they're doing them on site, that place doesn't do room service. So as an introvert, I'm used to getting room service before and after my keynote because I'm exhausted afterwards. And beforehand, I really want to make sure that I'm really focusing. I practice and practice before I ever do any presentation. And I remember, I walked downstairs because I had to get a meal. And I walked straight into somebody that had just seen me speak from one of the, it was the Global Sales and Marketing Conference, Global Leaders Conference. And one of them came up to me and asked me, just introduced himself and asked me questions. And next thing we knew, we were talking for 20 or 30 minutes. And his response, he said to me, Matt, I feel really comfortable talking to you. I have to admit, there's like 85 people here. And I don't feel comfortable talking to them anywhere near as much as I do you because I heard your story and I feel a lot more connected. And I said, I'm a little confused by that. I mean, sure, you heard about me because you saw me speak, but most of these people have been here for years, right? Do you know that those people are coming? How is it that you didn't look them up on LinkedIn, work out who you wanted to talk to, work out what they were interested in? I mean, there was a time I got a sponsor. I was looking for a sponsorship off Dell for an event. I just hopped online, found out that he had an Instagram profile, saw that it was public, and saw he was really into Peloton. Literally, our first part of our conversation, he asked me what I enjoyed doing on my weekends, and I said, I love going for long runs, but with the weather the way it is, I'm just not able to go out as often as I wanted. For the next 20 minutes, he talked at me about the amazing invention of Peloton, and I didn't have to say a thing. And then after that, he thought we had a really great relationship. So what I really want you to understand is, firstly, every skill is learnable, but then it also takes planning and preparation for an introvert to employ the strategies that they need to be successful at these so-called extroverted arenas. And I call them so-called extroverted arenas because I believe introverts with planning and preparation have a natural edge. For extroverts, they need to realize that with planning and preparation, they can leverage the skill sets of their introverts and actually can perform better themselves. And that's why I believe they have a disadvantage. Not because they're not capable, but because they don't do the planning and preparation that they should, because they love winging things. That's where, they get their natural ability is something they're quite proud of. But the problem is that without systems and process, just like anything else, it never delivers as successfully as somebody that's holding true to a process.
Sorry about that. I want to ask a few more questions about introvert versus extrovert, and just to say, first of all, that I really identify with being an introvert. I think my Briggs-Myers test, I scored 14 out of 15 on the introvert scale, which puts me way on the end. And I know this about myself. I guess the first question that I want to ask, and once we ask these questions, I want to bring it back around to negotiation in real estate, and maybe if you think of, well, we'll go into negotiation in real estate, but I wanted to ask, first of all, are introvert and extrovert black and white categories? Are they immutable categories? Can an introvert, when they apply strategies, begin to think of themselves as becoming an extrovert, or are they always an introvert with strategies that help them define their path forward, and vice versa? Yeah,
that's a really important question, Daniel, and I'm glad you asked that, because I actually think that question actually highlights the greater problem. Because what happens is, first thing is, and I will say, I spoke at the AAISP Global Leadership Summit, and that's the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals. And when I delivered that presentation, I interviewed we sent out a survey to all the sales leaders that were in the organization, that were coming. And it was really interesting. I just asked, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? And we'd get responses like, I was an introvert, but don't worry, I'm an extrovert now. Like it was a bad thing to be an introvert, or like it's even changeable in the first place. And then we'd hear some people say, I was an extrovert, but since COVID and I've been home a lot more, I find myself much more introverted. Again, not possible. The problem that I really see is that people say, oh, I used to be introverted, but now I've learned systems and process. Well, they don't need to say I've learned systems and process, but now I find myself much more extroverted. If you're successful at it, you actually don't find yourself becoming more extroverted. You actually become an introvert with systems and processes. And this is why that's really important. The desired outcome in these activities is not becoming more extroverted. It's actually leveraging a system and a strategy that allows you to leverage your natural strengths and your natural gifts. Because if you think about it, extroverts, some might say they're not the best listeners. Some might say they're not the most empathetic. Now, that's not to say they can't learn those systems and processes to do those activities. There's some great books on that. But, and I will say that HR tends to believe that those elements, those things are learnable. So they will send you to coaching to learn those skills. But they need systems and processes that allow them to leverage their natural strengths. On the other side, an introvert needs to lean into their amazing ability to empathize, their amazing ability to actively listen, but systemize out the elements they find uncomfortable, like small talk and the initial part of a negotiation, and how to handle the certain steps. And, all of those things are so vitally important. So can you change it? Is it, hard and fast? Well, the answer is that introversion needs to be defined in a simpler way. I think psychologists have made it way too confusing, maybe because they get all those great grant dollars to make it so. But what I will tell you is this: introversion is just where you draw your energy from. So if you draw your energy from being by yourself or with a couple of close friends and family, you're an introvert. If you draw your energy by being out and about with people, then you're an extrovert. Now, that doesn't mean you can't learn strategies and process for it to take less of your energy, but it doesn't change who you innately are. And I want to make that clear. For me, when I finish this session, I will have some downtime because this takes a lot of energy out of me. But I don't have any anxiety before I do it anymore, because I've learned that with enough practice, that just doesn't happen. When I spoke at Microsoft Inspire, and that wasn't just sales. I mean, that was the global, organization of Microsoft. Lots of people in that room, and not only in front of you, behind you. terrifying for the average introvert speaking for the first time. But for me, I felt totally comfortable. Now, that didn't mean that I wasn't tired afterwards. The best example I can give you is when I was, I run an event. It's one of the largest events in America for small businesses. But basically, the event is focused on helping small businesses grow. And when I did that event for the first year, Jim Cathcart, who's probably the most award-winning speaker in the world, came to that event, and he was the closing speaker, and he was involved in the event for 3 days. I also was involved in that event for 3 days. When we got to the third day, when we were done, he was so charged up. He wanted to go and experience the live music capital of the world in Austin, where I lived at that time. I, on the other hand, wanted to go home, put on a hoodie, and really just cry to myself probably for a couple of hours because I was exhausted. Now, he was my guest. I have never in my life had to ask a 70-year-old if it was okay if I went home because I was so tired when it got to about midnight. So my energy was drained. So if you draw your energy from being by yourself, it doesn't mean you can't do these activities. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy them. As a matter of fact, I love networking now. I love doing these kind of activities. It just doesn't mean that I'm not tired afterwards. So can you change? The answer is no. But you can find yourself learning systems and processes to learn how to enjoy something. You'll likely still be tired afterwards though, because it still takes from you. Now, if we were to look at, can we learn processes and systems to be great at everything? That is my profound belief. My profound belief is that we all have natural skills and natural capabilities, and we all have natural skills gaps, not disabilities, not inabilities, but skills gaps. And if we start looking at it as that, then all of a sudden we realize that we can negotiate, we can learn to negotiate. Even if we're terrible at it, we can learn to sell, we can network, we can learn to lead. We can, I do a whole bunch of presentations on storytelling, and I teach it to salespeople, I teach it to marketers, I teach it to leaders, because stories is the heart of all of those things, especially if you're an introvert. Because if you're an introvert, what you want to do is think about the story that you want to tell, and you've got to get rid of the jargon. It's not, I was speaking to a customer, they wanted this and we gave it to them, or, I understand what you want, what you're all thinking. However, here's what I want you to think. And here's a very quick example. I'm talking about three-dimensional stories, like the story of how you met your life partner, right? At the beginning, it sounds a little bit bulky and it's uncomfortable, but you perfect it. And eventually, I know the story of my wife and I, we've told it many times. It's a theatrical masterpiece. I say certain things, she says certain things, we'll say things together, we'll hold hands and we're like, that's how we met. So what you really need to understand is with planning and preparation, I have been able to create a whole series of stories that I can pick and choose and use at any time, which allows people to believe that I'm an inspirational, natural leader and natural influencer that can just get a message out. It just comes easy to me. It doesn't come easy to me. I've just put in a lot of practice, and therefore I may not come across as introverted, but I absolutely am.
I was reflecting just on my own experience with overcoming social anxiety, and you hit on a key word for me there, and that was anxiety. I think that I do podcasting. I host this real estate club. Those are things that I do that actually for me help me to get out there and practice the skills of speaking to people. And one thing I noticed about myself is that during the pandemic, and when I have times where I'm just more socially isolated, I tend to not practice those skills as much, and that actually causes my social anxiety to go up. And I have a fair amount of social anxiety. I get nervous when I speak around people. I try not to show it, but I notice that the more I actually do that and go in front of people and speak to people, over time that tends to go away. And that I suppose is in my head. I had been, I didn't think I was becoming more extroverted, but I might explain that to somebody else by saying I'm practicing being more extroverted. And really what I meant was I'm doing a better job of managing my social anxiety.
Absolutely. And I will say a few things to that point. So firstly, social anxiety, highly sensitive syndrome are not introversion. They are separate boxes. They all need to go in. Now, you can be highly sensitive and introverted. You can also be highly sensitive and extroverted. You could be shy and extroverted. And that's a tough one, but people are that. what you've got to learn is there's strategies and systems for all of it. The thing that I'm really focused on though, is if you've learned strategies and systems, stop saying that you've become more extroverted, because that's not the end goal. The goal is that you have become a much more influential or a much more articulate introvert, and you've leveraged your natural talents. And the reason why this is important, especially for, I mean, we're in an investment event, right? So if we're at an investment event, you've got money to invest, which means you've got to be at least at a certain level of leadership or a certain level of experience, which means that if you are introverted, but you're now, because you've learned strategies and systems, become more comfortable in talking to people, there are people that work for you that have just started, that are scared of their own shadow, that are still uncomfortable communicating, putting their hand up. You ask, if you're an extrovert, you might be asking these people to come to a meeting on Tuesday, and they're too scared to say what will be the agenda and is there anything specific that you plan on asking me so I can plan and prepare beforehand. So the first thing we need to do is we need to educate people that these are not disadvantages, and we should be open and honest about it, right? The worst thing that happened in the world is everyone did personality tests, and then they punished anybody that didn't get the right score. That's horrific. What we need to do is realize, especially if we don't want to be a homogenous group, that we need, for innovation's sake, we need all these unique ideas, but these unique ideas don't always come up in a boiler room. So what we need to start to do is, if we are introverted, is we have to start openly highlighting to the people around us that we are introverted, not that we've become more extroverted. Becoming extroverted is not the desired effect. I look at some of the ways that extroverts go and network, and in the sales world, they're like, do you want to buy from me? What about you? What about you? I'm never going to do that. It's horrific. For me, I need to be much more strategic, much more thought out, and that comes with planning and preparation. And to your point, Daniel, what you said is that if I'm not practicing, if I'm not doing this often, I find myself shrink back. Well, I do too. If I haven't spoken from stage in a while, I have to focus on managing my negative self-talk. I have to focus on getting myself into a position where I feel totally comfortable being on stage. But I mean, this is not new stuff. I mean, there are football teams that have a tune-up game before they play an important match. Is that because if they don't play a tune-up match, they're naturally terrible football players? No, it's because planning, preparation, and practice always improve performance. And that's what we have to focus on.
All right, let's bring that around a little bit to the art of negotiation now. And I'm curious on your take on the differences between perhaps an introvert setting up a sales cycle and an introvert setting up a negotiation. Of course, here at Intel, we're all in teams. We negotiate with our managers, we negotiate with our peers. Our team negotiates with peer teams and other related teams. There's negotiations all over the place, of course. And the same with real estate. If you're out there and you're looking for a property, it's a negotiation. I'm going to offer you this price. They want me to buy at that price. Oh, well, maybe we agree on a price, but now we have to go through all the terms. You need to fix this, or I want it for, I want something slightly different in the contract. How do we go about, first of all, is there a fundamental difference in a sales cycle and a negotiation cycle for an introvert? And then what advice can you give to people on negotiations? What advice can you give to introverts in negotiations?
Absolutely. So firstly, is there a fundamental difference? Yes, the steps are different. However, what I like people to do, and I think this is really important for people to understand. Sales, the way I look at it, networking, negotiation, they're all the same. Imagine it as a production line, right? So if you get all the raw materials for a silicon chip and you throw it at the wall, it's not going to go so well. But if you put it on a production line, it's got more chance of coming out correctly. So what you need to do is you need to understand that all of these things are systems. And firstly, if you think of Henry Ford's a great example. When he first took cars off the line, he didn't produce anywhere near what he produces now. But he focused on improving the system and improving the system. And now there are organizations all over the world, all these amazing mass production motor vehicle companies. The same needs to be considered when we're looking at sales, negotiation, networking. What we need to do is see it as a step-by-step system. And one of the things I love about that, especially for an introvert, is that when we see it as an external system that we're tinkering with, We can be scientists, right? We can look at the data and make decisions. So we're looking at the overall system and say, hang on a second, that didn't work. Let's change this one variable. Notice I said one variable, not multiple variables, just like a science experiment. If you change multiple variables, you don't know what's blowing up in your face. So what I always recommend to people, and actually I've been on a couple of negotiation podcasts, and they're always asking for what that one thing that can really make a difference is, and we can get to that. But what I would suggest is this. If you're coming from a very foundational, I'm not a great negotiator, or if you're a brilliant negotiator, now there's a separation there. If you're a bad negotiator, you're going to hold on to this advice for dear life. For a brilliant negotiator, you're going to have to take a slight back step to catapult forward. Both of you will have an advantage following this, which is find a methodical process that you can trust. Like if you're trying to learn networking, then, I mean, you don't need to buy my books. My publisher hates me when I say this. You don't need to buy my books. You can download the first chapters of both books at the introvertsedge.com and the introvertsedge to networking.com. And I literally lay out the step-by-step process. Just rip that off and put it in that order. And if you do that very quickly, if you're looking at sales, you'll realize there's some things out of order and you'll fix that. You'll realize there's some things that don't fit and you'll throw that out because you shouldn't be saying it to customers. And then you'll realize there's some gaping holes, usually around asking great questions, listening to those answers, by the way, and then telling great stories. If you fix those things, you'll double your sales in 60 days. I've proven it time and time again in technical sales. By fixing that and telling great stories and building the process correctly, sales cycles shrink, closure rate goes up. When you're thinking about applying it to networking, you get improvements again by focusing on a process, because you need to start by being interested before interesting. You need to prepare before you go. You need to talk about passion and mission, not function and jargon. You need to tell stories the same way. And all of that can be done with practice. When we move to negotiation, it's exactly the same. First thing is, if you go in without a plan, how can you expect to get to an outcome? I don't know any business that well, I do know businesses that start without business plans. They don't tend to last very long. So you do need to understand that if you are running a business like you run your negotiation or like your sales or like your networking process or your leadership process, you'd likely go broke. So why is it that we wing this? Because we think we either have it or we don't. So what we need to do is first understand that it's a step-by-step process. Now, I've written books on introverted sales and networking, but I'm not the only introvert that teaches this stuff. As I said, Zig Ziglar was an introvert. Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI, the world's largest networking group, is an introvert. Half the people, I'm on Global Guru's top 30 sales professionals in the world, half of them are introvert. I know them personally. What you need to understand is that if you're looking how to lead, how to parent, how to negotiate, if you're an introvert, you need to find another introvert that's teaching that, because you have to get beyond your belief that it is possible for you, that success in that discipline is possible for you. And as introverts, we have all these excuses that get in our own way. That's why, I created a platform called Introvert, just to hit you with. That's why I created a podcast called The Introvert's Edge, where we do nothing more than just highlight what I call secret introverted titans. Amazing industry titans, both business owners and senior leaders, that are just crushing it in activities that you'd never think an introvert could even survive in. So once you realize it's a system, it's liberating, because all of a sudden you no longer worry about the sale or the specific introduction or the specific meeting that you led, but only the data that gives you in order to improve your performance. So that meeting after meeting, negotiation after negotiation, you create a better result. Now, here's the advantage that planning really gives you, especially when you're an introvert talking to an extrovert. Extroverts just love to have a conversation. So when I'm trying to get stakeholder support, they're happy just to have a dialogue with me. On the other hand, I'm methodical in making sure that that outcome works exactly the way I want it to. And one of the things I talk about is building momentum stories. I'll talk to one person and then I'll go to the next person and I'll build that person's interest in the dialogue into the story. And then I'll keep building new elements. So when I'm trying to bring together stakeholder support, I talk about my passion and the mission. By the way, if you're working in an organization and you don't know how to communicate your passion and mission for doing what you do, you could have done anything. Why this? Stop talking about jargon. Nobody cares. If you want stakeholder support, be passionate about making a difference in a specific, whether it's improving customer service or driving less homogeneous teams or bringing in more people of different backgrounds to introduce higher levels of innovation, whatever it is, be passionate about it, be on a mission to share that, and learn to leverage story to get beyond the jargon. If you do that, you can create transformative change. So bringing that back to negotiation, what's the one thing that can really turn the corner? Well, firstly, a lot of times when we're negotiating, we tend to speak at somebody rather than ask questions. And then we tend to tell people why they need to make this decision or what we're thinking and why. What we need to do instead, when somebody says, well, especially in real estate, I'm not sure if I want to sell you the house for that price, and we're trying to get it for a really cheap price. We might tell a story about somebody else and then how easy they found it. I work with a lot of people in commercial real estate syndication, where they're trying to educate investors to invest their money so they can syndicate it into a commercial real estate kind of a portfolio. And a lot of times these people are like, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're smart people. And if you talk to their logical mind can process all the data, but they'll still find it overwhelming, which will be a problem for them because they find that whole experience uncomfortable to be outside their comfort zone. You share a story, it short circuits their logical mind, you speak directly to their emotional mind, and the brain literally goes story time. Stories also, and this is huge for negotiation, when you tell stories when you're negotiating, firstly, they'll remember up to 22 times more information when embedded into a story. It's a study out of Princeton, which is really cool. It means tomorrow they don't call freaking out, changing their mind, or trying to roll back what happened. Secondly, what's known, and this is a study out of Stanford, what it does is it stimulates our reticular activating system, which actually causes our brains to synchronize. It creates artificial rapport. So if you really find it tough to create rapport with someone, and maybe that's why your negotiations are suffering, because they don't want to have a win-win situation, because they don't feel like they have a good enough connection with you yet. Stories allow you to create that artificial rapport, which studies show, by the way, while introverts struggle with creating surface level rapport, which extroverts can, introverts create much deeper relationships. We just don't have as many of them. So if you learn how to leverage story and you learn how to create a system to be able to get to that story, you have an absolute superpower when it comes to the negotiation room.
Speaking of stories, Satish is asking, can we learn more about how Matt started, is it 5 or 6 successful businesses, and how this helps the discussion within real estate? So I guess story time, can you share with us how you built your business and what were the steps that took there, and what can we pull from it for our own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think firstly, let me say, when we're looking at real estate is a business. So the thing you've got to understand when you're starting a business is that it's daunting. I mean, for the people, you all work in Intel, so rain, hail, or shine, hopefully you'll always get a paycheck. And you have consistency with what you do. Well, when you invest in the market, when you invest in property, the problem that you have is that it's inconsistent, right? It can have highs, it can have lows, properties can go up, interest rates can change. You can be talking about whether the houses are highly appraised or whether they're not. So we have to learn to strategize, we have to learn systems, and we have to really learn to research, right? So for me, what I find is, and it's interesting when people start their own businesses, I work a lot with introverted service provider businesses, and it's really interesting when you see those people. They'll research the market, they'll research the qualifications they need, what licenses they need, but then they'll start a business and they'll avoid the 3 things that I think make a business successful: differentiation, niche marketing, and sales systemization. Without that, they're basically just trying to create a job for themselves, right? So, and it's not just introverts, extroverts do this as well. So here's the thing that I learned. And so to answer your question, how did I get into business for myself? The answer was, and this was a really kind of horrific experience for me. So I started a job in commission-only sales. And commission-only sales is wonderful if you're good at it. If you're bad at it, you make very, very little money. So there were a lot of people that were making very little money. And when I started and I realized that you could make sales a system, and I got promoted the first time, then I started teaching people, and I found that introverts gravitated to my ideas much more than extroverts did, at least until we had a whole bunch of introverts that were killing it in the sales. And then all of a sudden the extroverts were like, tell me about this sales system thing where I don't just say whatever comes out of my mouth. And then all of a sudden we started to get some really great success with everybody. Now, what happened at that point is I got promoted again, and then I got promoted again. And what happens when you're in commission-only sales, by the way, they say, you take all the risk, we'll pay you if it works out. Then you get promoted and they say, well, now we know you're good. We'll pay you a little bit to manage the team. And then we'll give you a little bit off everyone else if it works out. Then you get promoted again and they say, we'll pay you a little bit more, but we're going to pay you a little bit less of a lot more people. Now, if you get promoted slowly, then you usually build up a good amount of money and you move to the next one, you move to the next one. But here's the thing. I found that every time I got promoted, because I got promoted so quickly, I would take a huge pay cut. And then I'd get promoted again and get another huge pay cut. And then I'd have to work it all up. And so eventually I got promoted to a city called Adelaide, which is in South Australia, for anyone that knows Australia really well. And if you know Australia really well, you'll know that Adelaide is a small city. It's like getting told to go and make Austin sell as much as New York and California, and LA together. And that's what I did. I actually made that state in Adelaide sell more than the two major states, Melbourne and Sydney, the two major cities, Melbourne and Sydney put together. And while I was away, because all of a sudden the person that they put in charge was somebody that didn't focus on systemization, they started to lose salespeople. Other people started to go back to what they knew. And Victoria, where I was from, Melbourne, had collapsed. So I got asked if I was willing to go back to Melbourne, Australia, which was where my family was. So of course I wanted to go, but I said, listen, I have had pay cut after pay cut to be promoted. I was young, I wanted to be promoted. I said, you cannot though, give me a pay cut to come back. I've now got myself back to a great income. I've got a great team here. If I go back, I need to make sure that the salary you give me is really large, or at least large enough to make that transition worth it for me. And they said, yeah, absolutely, we'll do that. So I left, I put somebody else in charge of the Adelaide team, somebody I'd trained as the state manager. I went back to Victoria and they did. They gave me a high wage for what they thought was high. They gave me the equivalent of $45,000, which by the way, I was earning well over a six-figure income as a commission-only sales rep, less than a year later, like a year earlier. So I said to them, I said, you can't pay me $45,000. You give me this target that is stretched over so many reps. It's going to take me a long time to get this back up. And I'm doing all of this for you. I should have just stayed in Adelaide where I was earning over $100,000 a year with salary and commissions. And they went away and they thought about it and they came back and they said, Matt, you're 19. There's no way you're going to get a 45. I mean, you've got no degree and you're 19. There's no way you're going to get a job that pays anything like this anywhere else. And you know what? They were right. So I started my own business. And I left and I started a telecommunications business because it was all I knew. So I then went and built, we turned over $1 million in the first year. By year 3, we're the largest broker in B2B cell phones in the country in Australia. And then from there, moving to other businesses was really about really connecting myself more with my passion. Because what I found, and I think this is really important when it comes to investments, is there's lots of types of investments. And it's got to set you on fire because you've got to research them a lot. And so for me, what I found is I made amazing money when I was 20. And but if somebody had mentioned another call rate to me, talking about call rates was like nails on a chalkboard. I was so over talking about cell phone plans and call rates. And what I learned is you can create a rapid growth business out of anything, but there's nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you don't like in a business you can't stand. You could say the same thing about a career. There's nothing worse than a really good career where you can't stand what you do and you can't stand your boss. So I found that the more I connected with my passion and what my mission was, that I got more energy. I felt more connected with myself. I found myself feeling less inauthentic. I felt less imposter syndrome, less reflection where I beat myself up. And more than that, I actually found my way into a lot of positive mindset thoughts that I just wouldn't have had if I was doing something I didn't love. So how do we bring that back to investment? Well, I work with a bunch of people that are in commercial real estate that are trying to raise money, and they just want to raise money from anybody. Well, if they're passionate and they are passionate about a specific group of people, they should raise it from them. And they need to talk about why they're passionate and the mission that they're on, and then explain it in that way. If they're interested in being involved in real estate, well, there's commercial real estate, there's residential real estate, there's apartments, there's houses, there's different cities, there's lots of things that you need to make a decision. So you've got to stop saying, let's look at every opportunity and let's start looking at these specific opportunities. Because what happens is when you're in the negotiating room and you know that opportunity much better than most, you have a much better chance of success. But more than that, you can actually speak to your care for this specific deal and why it's important, not getting connected to it, which is never a good thing in investments, but why you're connected to actually making a difference, or renovating this specific thing, or demolishing this to build more affordable housing, or whatever that is. So for me, I mean, I got into business because I didn't have another option. And funnily enough, I went back to study my MBA, and I'm really glad I did, but it just wasn't a thing that I could have done back then. I needed to know why I wanted it. And when I was running my businesses, I knew exactly why I needed to have that education. But falling into business was, I fell into door-to-door sales. I fell into running my own businesses. What I would highly recommend here, a lot of people fall into investment in real estate because they're worried about not having enough money to retire. They fall into, and then they start looking at things like cryptocurrency. They start looking at things like the stock market, and they make poor decisions. What you need to do is work out why you're doing it and what the passion and mission is behind it. And then you need to make sure that you bring that into your story, you bring that into the conversations, and you focus only on that. Don't be a soldier of fortune. Trust me, you'll make more money focusing on the thing you're actually interested in, and you'll have fun.
Let's open up the lines here for anybody who would like to take themselves off mute, or if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll start doing that here. And while people are queuing that up, Matt, can you give your contact information so that people can reach out and hear more from you? And I'm also going to do something that I've been waiting to do ever since I set up a little video broadcasting system on my screen. Here are your 2 books.
Oh, there you go. That looks great. So what I will do is this. So obviously, for the people that are listening, obviously the introverts are always the ones that tend not to ask questions in a public forum. So because of that, what I'm going to suggest is, of course, you can go to the Introvert's Edge. And by the way, as I said, if you just go to the introvertsedge.com or the Introvert's Edge to networking.com, you'll be able to download the first chapter of both of those books. If you're in sales, the sales book's probably the one to go with. But for everyone else, there's a really great story of a career professional in the first chapter of the networking book. I think you'll really enjoy, and it'll really help you see networking very, very differently. A lot of times career professionals think that, they may never want to leave their current organization, but they are struggling to get promoted within it. And that's because, it's the same thing. If you run your own business, you're looking for lots of customers. If you work for someone, you're looking at getting your passion, mission, your message across to a single customer or a series of stakeholders that are all coming from the same source, i.e. Intel. Now, for those people that do have questions that they do want to ask, whether it's about, I get asked, some really interesting questions about people that have got introverted kids, that, they're extroverted parents, introverted kids. I get asked questions about, people that are, struggling themselves to, find their voice in a meeting or maybe a conference to get recognized. And there are strategies for all of these things. What I would recommend that you do is my LinkedIn profile. I just posted it in the comments. Feel free to ask your question there. And then what you'll find is, because of my reading issues and my spelling issues, you'll tend to find that I will send you a voice memo back that gives you the exact strategy. For those that don't know, you can actually do voice messaging in LinkedIn. You just need the iPhone app. So feel free to send me an audio message and then I'll send you an audio message back, or you can write it out and then I'll send you an audio message back. But I don't want you to feel like, this session was really just, at the tip of the iceberg. I've done hundreds of podcasts on this specific topic and going deep into the specific strategies. But sometimes you might have one specific question you want answered. Feel free to ask it there and I'll be very, very happy to help you. But yeah, my website's matthewpollard.com if you want to, go and experience my world. But I would suggest you start with the first chapter of the book, or just asking the question that's the most relevant and important to you to get to the next step in your career or in your negotiation, in your investment direction. And I will say, if you type in Matthew Pollard, like negotiation and the word Matthew Pollard after it, you'll find, I think, at least 3 of the biggest negotiation podcasts where I've been featured on it. So if you feel like you're an introvert that wants to definitely go deep into the negotiation topic, then check one of those out. We go into story, we go into some of the conversational structures, and you'll get a ton out of that. I learned off YouTube, so I put a ton of free content out there to help other people do the same.
All right. And then do we have any last minute questions for the introverts out there? And if not, we will close it off and wish you all a happy weekend. All right, Matthew, thank you so much for being here with our group and for presenting a little bit about how introverts can set up systems in order to become more proficient in their communications, in order to achieve their sales, their negotiations, their real estate goals. Thank you very much for being here and have a great, go ahead.
I was going to say, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Daniel.
Thank you. And to everybody else, next week, we have, if you go to the meetup session here, we have several of the, almost every Friday, posted here now. Next week, we have Keshav Pollard, who is from the Amazon REI Club. And then after that, we're bringing back Whitney Ellens Hutton, who's going to be talking to us about car washes and how to invest in car washes. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And of course, if you want to talk to me, I have a free 15-minute call that I open up to anybody if you want to talk about a real estate topic. So feel free to email me or book a time to do that as well. Talk to you later. Bye.